born, I was pretty much destined to do this project. A few months ago, like second month I was doing this project, I thought to myself, my first word was car. And I was born in the Motor City. It wasn't exact. I was born in part of the Motor City. There's Detroit, and then there's Grosse Pointe, but they're pretty much the same thing. I originally wasn't going to do this project. It was my second idea, but it's my first choice now. If I had done my first choice project, I would have enjoyed it. But this was just so much cooler because now I have a car, my own animal. You guys groomed an animal, and then taking pictures of an animal, I rebuilt an animal. So I was sitting around in my 5-hour course for getting my license, which was completely unexciting. And during the lunch break, my dad sent me an email saying, how about we take a look at this car afterwards? So I'm like, okay. But he said, don't be too excited because we may not get it, and you don't want to give him the idea you're going to buy it. So we get there, and Bob opens the garage, and he starts it up, and I just start giggling. And I said, I want this car then. So we worked out a price, and we loaded it up. I actually wasn't here for this part, but we loaded it up onto a flatbed. There's Bob. And there's my car, which from the outside, and for some aspects, looks like I did almost nothing to it. But I did a lot. I think I worked 200 hours maybe, including all the research pieces, putting together everything. And I worked on it at LaDuca Auto, which Vincent LaDuca, my mentor, used to be a Green Meadow parent. And I found him through Ms. Monteleone, thankfully, because it's an awesome mentor. I can't say it enough. So we loaded parts. My car pretty much was in 5 bins and about 100 of these baggies. There's a funny story about this. I'll get back to this bag. And we loaded it to the back of our SUV. Here is a fair amount of the car's trim on the ground in my garage. And there's panels, these are rusted, and there's the bumper. And the main problem with buying a classic car is because this car is 40 years old, because it's 2012, 1972. This is a Monte Carlo. The main problem you can have with these cars is they will just start rusting if anything goes wrong. Thankfully, this one, Bob, this was going to be his labor of love. He replaced the engine, he replaced the exhaust system, he replaced the entire body. It looks ridiculous. It's awesome now. But that's the hardest part because these sheet metal pieces will just rust and your car will fall apart and it will look ugly. And I've looked at other cars now and I've seen plenty of Monte Carlos on eBay. They're really expensive and their body is essentially gone. So these cars still worth a bit. So for most of the summer, I did cleaning up things, taking things out, and sorting. And this is essentially what would have happened to the body of the car if it wasn't redone. This is the battery plate, so this is holding like a 20-pound battery on it. So you don't want that to look like this. It's really rusty. And we just started cleaning things. I had Emmett, who lives with me at the moment, and I'd drag him over to Vince's across the bridge, and I'd say, come on, we're going to clean this. So the engine looks more or less in shape here, but almost none of the hoses are actually connected to the right places. It could run for a few minutes, but there's a few other things that would have made it completely fail, would have seized up. I'll get to that in a second, actually. And here's me under the car doing rust proofing. Emmett helped a lot too, except he didn't get a tetanus shot, so I couldn't have him look up at it, because he would get in his eyes. So the underside of the car wasn't particularly rusty, but I still had to rust proof it just in case, because water comes up, salt comes up, it's a mess. And the seats were in incredible condition. I don't know how, but I had to rust proof them too, but everything else is pristine about them. It's awesome. The interior of the car was essentially gone. As you see, there was nothing on the doors. There was part of the window motor in there, but it's not there. The dashboard was pretty much the only thing on the interior that was fully assembled. The roof of the car, called the headliner, it's on the inside made of fabric, is falling out still. We have to fix that. And here's where the back seat goes. Nothing there, you can see. The interior of the car was redone, not the interior, but the actual metal, because you probably could have seen through the bottom of the car if it hadn't been. And you can tell there's the back, there's the trunk. Here's Emmett pretending to drive. And there's it's kind of a funny thing because you can see how the interior is gone, there's nothing in there, there's dust, etc. But the outside of the car is like perfect. And that's just because it was redone. So we brought it into the shop because I needed to replace the wheels because only 2 of the wheels were actually ours and I don't think any of the bolts were. So they couldn't just sit there. And I was terrified of the pneumatic drill to take it off. Actually, but because it's loud and it shakes, and I can't do this, and it's like you have to push through it. So I did. And these are the wheels that we put on, which they don't look super special right now in this picture, just because they're not assembled. But these are the original factory wheels that would have came on a Chevelle, Monte Carlo, a Nova, or an El Camino. They're all pretty much in the same family, but they all have different uses. The Chevelle is the really fast one. The Monte Carlo is the equivalent of like a Cadillac today. I don't really know much about the Nova, but the El Camino is like a pickup truck, except the front of it was a muscle car. It's very confusing. And these are in incredible condition. There's a little bit of rust on some of the chrome parts here, but from far away, it's really impossible to see that there's any imperfections. So here is essentially the car with the wheels on it, but there's no bumpers, there's no trim. You can't get into the car without sticking your finger into that hole. This is dangerous. I mean, that's a tail. We had to replace those bulbs. So it looks pretty from very far away, but you get up close and it's confusing. There's no trunk lock, so we had to stick a screwdriver in and open it like that. But there's the trunk lock. We put it in, and it's nice, and it's got a little knife. Monte Carlo, that's where it's from. We put the locks on and we put the door handles on. So that was rather easy to do just because the locks, all I had to do was lubricate them a little bit and I had to make sure they worked, but they were pretty much together. We had 4 of them. It's a 2-door car, makes no sense. There is my mentor doing something that we had to do plenty of, which was cutting up random pieces of metal and screwing them in so the rest of the car would actually fit together. And I used to do little plastic models of cars. I want to now, I just haven't found a surface in my house that is able to get that dirty anymore. But the thing that's different between those plastic model cars and this gigantic metal car is the little model cars fit together correctly. These don't. Because this is 40 years old, even if they claim it's an original, it's modeled off the original, it won't. And we spend plenty of time trying to get these things to fit. So we bought the front, I think they're called the bezels, and we painted them, which that wasn't too hard to do, is match the color, spray can, etc. There's me doing this. There's not very many pictures of me in this, because I was usually taking the pictures. And I had to connect the tail lights with a little, it's dry soldering. You're taking a little tube and you pinch the ends and it connects the wires together. I don't look that enthusiastic in this picture. That's just, my dad doesn't know how to use the camera. This is a very partial shot of someone who wasn't my mentor, but he could have been. This is Antonio, and he's doing the really heavy parts of the bumpers, because these bumpers are like 100 pounds. I couldn't have held it up. I helped hold mostly, and then he had to finish it up because I was still slightly terrified of these pneumatic drills. The oil pan is one of the longest things, other than the interior, that I had to spend on. See, I usually went in for about 8-hour days to the shop, and I spent 7 hours on this. And we bought a new oil pan, which we got, it said it's going to fit. It sort of did, but it didn't. We spent about 6.5 hours trying to get that to fit, but it didn't. So we took the old one, which had a crack right around there, and it was dented in. I don't know how that happened. This car is relatively high off the ground. So we welded that, and we bent the oil pan back into submission. And this is me draining the oil pan. Getting excessively dirty. I overcame my fear. I mean, this was a smaller thing than the wheel and motor, but I still had the face protection. And this is just without the oil pan. We added almost all the trim onto it. We had the bumpers, we had the bezels, the wheels, but there were no mirrors. We had to buy the mirrors. We had to buy a new fuel pump because the car could run for a few seconds and then the fuel would be too rich and it would go kick. That's not exactly the sound. It would more just start whining. We bought stuff ahead of time, so we bought new door panels because the ones we had were in okay shape, but we only had about one that was in okay shape. The others were in horrible shape. And we had to work on those, but that came on a later date, a few weeks ago actually. And we started putting in the windows. As you can see, there's only 1.5 windows in right now. And those were a lot more difficult than they should have been, mostly because we thought that our window motors that we had were just the driver's side. All the other ones worked, they were just kind of slow. Just the driver's side, we had to buy 4 of them because we kept thinking they shorted out, but we weren't grounding them. And it made it really, until recently, we've had a lot of problems with the windows, and now they work. This is I had to take a picture of this because I've never actually gotten my own license plate. The car I drove before this was completely dented up. I did a few of the dents. Like this is a new license plate. It's the orange one. I'm proud to say I'm the only one in the family with the New York license plate. It's orange. This is the door panels, which they came pretty much as cardboard sheets that had vinyl on them. They had all these details, except we had to take the old metal rails and bend it over, glue it with multiple types of glue. And we got some help with that by a professional car upholstery person. But I mean, we had to cut out this stuff, which is incredibly itchy, and I couldn't touch it because I would just start breaking out hives. We purposed these window switches, but I installed them upside down, so I had to turn them over while they were in the car, just that we had completely put all the interior panels in. It was a sad moment for me. These were really annoying to put in just because the screws were too short, and I had to spend like an hour, and it was mortifying. These took about 10 hours to put together. It looks easy, it wasn't easy. We bought a new center console because the old one had a few cracks in it, and I'm kind of OCD about cracks on things. And it was nicer anyway because it was black, and since the only thing in my car that's brown is the back seats, the front seats, and the dashboard, I wanted to match the panels at least. It was sort of like an oasis of brown with black panels. So here is the engine with a few more cables, more the tubes connected because there's almost nothing computer driven in this car. And there's the air filter on there. It's all shiny. It's kind of dusty but shiny. And here's with the mirrors and all the trim and the windshield wipers, which took quite a bit of adjusting to get to work because this is a custom-made hood. It's another pretty picture. But as you can see, the car still has random things just string into it. Because you could, after a while, after all the big pieces were connected, you could fit the entire car into the cab of the car. Just it wouldn't be in the right place in the car, just storage. I don't know why they do it. These are they're pretty much, I don't know how much they cost, but they're pretty cheap, but they're annoying because they're essentially just paper with a gloss on the other side so water doesn't come in. But I'm sure plenty other places water could come in on this car. That's another picture of Antonio. We're installing the backrest of the back seats. And there's probably a seat belt hanging out. Here is the almost finished back seat, except for the little headline that's hanging out, which I almost had to pull over the other day because that almost completely covered the back window. And that is the interior of the car, which you will see in a few seconds. But I would like to I'm going to have thank yous and questions before we go outside because this is the last project. That makes sense. So I would like to thank my mom and dad because without them I would be still on the computer trying to find a car. And I wasn't alive 40 years ago, so they know a little bit more about it. I would like to thank Antonio, who helped me, who took out plenty of time from his nights because I started going in at nights. I would like to thank Vince, my mentor, because without him I would be I wouldn't have any knowledge of cars. I helped a little bit with like other car stuff. I didn't actually, like I mostly just sat in the car and helped test brakes for other cars. I would like to thank Bob, the original owner of this car, because he did a lot of the really like expensive, and he did a lot of research, because most of the parts that we got were from either like a scrapyard or he like made at trades. So he gave us a lot of the pieces. It's like being given a Lego set, but not all the Legos are, there's connects in there. Not everything fits together, so we had to do a little bit of work. Give us a lot of extra pieces too, and we lost one box which had the seat belts, and there's a piece on the back that says Monte Carlo, and we had to tape that on, and this is what that bag has. These are the clips. So I guess it's too late now, but if it ever falls off, I'll put it on. I would like to thank Emmett for taking time out of his summer to help me essentially just scrub things and paint with this stuff that gets all black when it gets on you. But he had fun, as you can see from that picture. I'd like to thank my class for being my class. Didn't really do much, but and I'd like to thank Mr. Madsen for seeing my speech and liking it much more than I expected. Actually, I'll have questions outside because you probably want to see it outside, so let's do that. Everybody.